Even before he was elected, Donald Trump was warning us about the threat that China posed, and not just militaristically, but economically. For decades, we've been giving away our manufacturing base to a foreign country that we are now pretty much dependent upon for some seriously needed supplies like medicines. The labor costs were so cheap that many companies found it easier to send their factories overseas or just contract Chinese factories to make their products for them, ship it back to the United States, and sell it at a major markup. This is a very serious mistake. And now that we're facing a global pandemic, we're actually looking at a potential decline, a shortage in much needed medical supplies. There was one instance where American masks that were made in China were on their way here. They got turned around. Why? Well, I can't blame China for this one. In the face of a global pandemic, they said, we get the supplies first. And because we were having our medicine and medical supplies made in their country, they had no reason to give it away when they decided to protect their country before anyone else. The left has routinely railed on Trump over his stance on China. They said the tariffs were a bad idea and that the trade war was going to hurt everybody. But what's the alternative? Continue to allow these American companies send our manufacturing overseas? The left was wrong. The people who wanted stronger national border controls, who wanted factories in our own countries, they were right. And this is true for the UK and the United States. Back in 2016, Michael Moore gave a speech, which was heavily promoted by Donald Trump, where he said that Trump went to these auto manufacturers and said, I'm going to tax your car 35% if you make it overseas and no one will buy it. He said voting for Trump would be the biggest FU in the history of the world. And he was right. However, he went on to say that just like Brexit, these people in Europe didn't realize, or in the UK didn't realize if they voted for Brexit, they'd actually have to leave Europe. And now they regret it, Michael Moore said. Cue 3 years later, when people in the UK voted overwhelmingly a second time for a hard Brexit. They wanted to leave the European Union. They wanted to control their trade and control their borders. And we can see now why that was 100% correct. The first story I want to show you. Coronavirus could cause global medicine shortages as China's factory closure hits supply chains. I mean, that's a good enough reason, right? But the next thing I'm going to show you is going to infuriate you. In September, Donald Trump warned that U.S. companies need to get out of China. And of course, we saw the routine orange man bad, that Trump is a threat to international trade and relations, that the trade war would be bad for America, would hurt the economy. And now look where we are. Interestingly, in September, firms were warning that we were dependent upon China for much needed medicine in September. And now here we are facing down a global pandemic. And if they just listened, if they took it seriously, maybe we could have avoided much of this. Now, Donald Trump is not perfect. In fact, I would argue that in many ways, he hasn't done a good job on many things. The economy has done very, very well over the past several years. He deserves credit for that. But I don't care if the question is whether or not he's doing it right or he's or doing it poorly. The issue is, when faced with the alternatives, he was the only one saying he was going to take on China and the threat it posed. So when you're given the option to take a guy who might not do a good job or a guy who's saying he's not going to do the job at all, who do you pick? So sure, we can complain about Trump's response to the global pandemic. By all means, I think it's fair to do so. But what would we have had in the alternative? These other candidates were not talking about dealing with China the way Trump was. Would they have done even half as much as he did? And again, I'm not saying he actually completed the work or did a good job of it, but he was the only one talking about actually doing it. And now we can see just how bad it's really going to be because we are dependent upon foreign countries and they have no obligation to help us as this pandemic gets worse. Let's take a deep dive into exactly what happened, why it happened, and boy, you're going to get mad at this one. In September, they said we were dependent upon China for medicine. Months before this virus broke out. We could have solved this problem a long time ago. Now, before we get started, head over to timcast.com/donate if you'd like to support my work. There's several ways you can give, but the best thing you can do, share this video. Look, I know a lot of people don't want to hear what I have to say because they just want to hate the president no matter what. And I think it is absolutely fair to criticize the man and for a lot of things. But you got to admit, on this one, he was right. Plain and simple. If many of you also, I'll add this, haven't subscribed, and if you do like my content, hit the subscribe button, hit that notification bell. YouTube is absolutely de-ranking political commentary like this, and I gotta say, it is a strong likelihood this video will be suppressed because I'm talking about sensitive global issues, and a certain word that is a guaranteed suppression on YouTube, though this may change soon. We're talking about the global pandemic. Make sure you subscribe, hit the notification bell, because it's possible in the future YouTube censors me as they have in the past, and you will not even see these videos. The first story from March 4th, South China Morning Post. Of all sources, I find this one funny. They say factory activity in China. The top producer of active pharmaceutical ingredients hit all-time low in February after measures to halt outbreak. U.S. and Europe monitoring short-term delay to supplies with antibiotics, diabetes medications, HIV drugs, and ibuprofen among those heavily reliant on China. I gotta say, this infuriates me. But let me show you just how bad it gets. China hints at denying Americans life-saving coronavirus drugs. And there it is. Not only are they shutting down factories because of the outbreak in their country, which shouldn't have affected us initially, they're now saying straight up, you know what? If we wanted to, we could take it all away from you, and there is nothing you can do to stop it. Fox News reports. Now that the number of new people infected with coronavirus in China is slowing down, the country's Communist Party is ratcheting up threats against the West, with a particularly nasty warning about access to life-saving drugs aimed at the United States. In an article in Xinhua, the state-run media agency that's largely considered the mouthpiece of the party, Beijing bragged about its handling of COVID-19, a virus that originated in the city of Wuhan and has spread quickly around the world, killing nearly 5,000 people and infecting thousands more. The article also claimed that China could impose pharmaceutical export controls, which would plunge America into, quote, the mighty sea of coronavirus. The disturbing threats made during a global pandemic, as well as the scary consequences if that threat becomes real, highlight just how tight China's grip is on the global supply chain. Already, the Food and Drug Administration has announced the first drug shortage related to the coronavirus. Though it did not disclose which drug was in short supply, the FDA did say it could not access enough raw components needed because they are made in China. That doesn't come as a surprise to Senator Marco Rubio of Florida, who told Fox News on Thursday that America is dangerously reliant on China for the production of critical goods, including parts for technologies needed to fight COVID-19. Look, I am not too happy with Donald Trump's response to the coronavirus outbreak. He kept saying that it was like the flu, and I am not happy with it. I think he made a mistake. But I'm also not going to hold him responsible for the fact that an epidemic or a pandemic is occurring. I mean, that's nature. You can't do anything about it. And not only that, even if he did a bad job, at least he was in front of the threats to come. When he came out in September saying that we needed to get our firms out of China, if we had listened to him, we wouldn't necessarily be in this mess with a shortage of medical supplies. This is a story from September 1st, 2019. President Trump ordered U.S. firms to ditch China, but many already have, and more are on the way. Many already have. I think Trump's responsible for this. It's the tariffs, man. You got to look at what Michael Moore, that story he told about Donald Trump. We'll come back to the medicine, but let me show you how infuriating this really is. In this story, this is back on September 12th. U.S. officials worried about Chinese control of American drug supply. Basically, we've outsourced our entire industry to China, retired Brigadier General John Adams told NBC News. That is a strategic vulnerability. Here we are, months later, in the midst of shortages on medical supplies. And they knew, we knew, and what was done about it? Well, there was some stuff done. That's fair to say. But now we realize we didn't do it soon enough. And maybe Donald Trump, if we were able to move forward much more quickly on that, something could have been done. All I can really say is this. Perhaps there was never enough that could have been done. Perhaps Trump came in too late. Even though he came in and said China over and over again, perhaps it was too late. But there were people who were obstructing him, standing in his way. And that was a huge mistake. Maybe we could not have moved fast enough, but at least we moved as fast as we did. And Trump deserves credit for that. In the story, they say, antibiotics, which turn life-threatening infections into minor nuisances, are considered the single biggest advance in modern medicine. But imagine if the supply of antibiotics to the United States was suddenly cut off. American national security officials are worrying about that scenario as they come to grips with this little understood fact. The vast majority of key ingredients for drugs that many Americans rely on are manufactured abroad, mostly in China. Absolutely incredible. As the U.S. defense establishment grows increasingly concerned about China's potentially hostile ambitions, the pharmaceutical supply chain is receiving new scrutiny. Quote, if China shut the door on exports of medicines and their key ingredients and raw materials, U.S. hospitals and military hospitals and clinics would cease to function within months, if not days, said Rosemary Gibson, author of a book on the subject, China RX. Gibson told NBC News, China could potentially weaponize our medicines. They can sell us medicines without any medicine in them. They can sell medicines that have lethal contaminants. Other generic drugs whose key ingredients are manufactured in China include medicines for blood pressure, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, epilepsy, and depression. We can't make penicillin anymore, said Gibson. The last penicillin plant in the United States closed in 2004. A Chinese manipulation of drug ingredients or supply may seem like a fairly remote possibility. Oh, I love it. Hindsight is 2020. A state-run Chinese paper said this week that there's little chance the government would deliberately harm Americans by cutting off the flow of antibiotics. Well. Here we are. This story is from last September. How soon we learned the folly of our ways. But I will mention, it doesn't need to be deliberate. When China knew the outbreak hit them, they actually turned around a ship full of N95 masks. Why? We need them more. They're in our country, we control it, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. Meanwhile, over in America, we are facing a shortage of masks. We don't have enough. What an absurdly ridiculous thing this country has done, America, over the past several decades. Because individuals more concerned with profit did not care that they were selling out the American people and our ability to sustain ourselves. And this is the politicians and the corporations. Well, good on Trump for calling it out. But let's take a step into another area of economics, auto manufacturing and general manufacturing. And I want to show you something from Michael Moore. Many of you may have seen, but I think is absolutely incredible. This is a quote from a presentation Michael Moore did. This was posted by Democracy Now!, a left-wing media outlet. Michael Moore said, Donald Trump came to the Detroit Economic Club and stood there in front of the Ford Motor executives and said, quote, if you close these factories as you're planning to do in Detroit and build them in Mexico, I'm going to put a 35% tariff on those cars when you send them back, and nobody is going to buy them. It was an amazing thing to see. No politician, Republican or Democrat, had ever said anything like that to these executives. And it was music to the ears of people in Michigan and Ohio and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, the Brexit states. If you live here in Ohio, you know what I'm talking about. Whether Trump means it or not is kind of irrelevant because he's saying the things to people who are hurting. And it's why every beaten down, nameless, forgotten working stiff who used to be part of what was called the middle class loves Trump. He is the human Molotov cocktail that they've been waiting for, the human hand grenade that they can legally throw into the system that stole their lives from them. And on November 8th, Election Day, although they've lost their jobs, although they've been foreclosed on by the bank, next came the divorce, and now the wife and kids are gone, the car has been repoed, they haven't had a real vacation in years, they're stuck in the Obamacare bronze plan, where you can't even get a Percocet. They've essentially lost everything they had except one thing. The one thing that doesn't cost them a cent and is guaranteed to them by the American Constitution, the right to vote. They might be penniless. They might be homeless. They might be effed over and effed up. It doesn't matter because it's equalized on that day. A millionaire has the same number of votes as the person without a job, 1. And there's more of the former middle class than there are in the millionaire class. He then goes on to say, this would be the biggest FU in history. And he was right. But Michael Moore made a serious and critical mistake in his assessment. He went on to say that they would regret it. He said it would feel good. Here's what he said. He said that Trump's election is going to be the biggest FU ever recorded in human history. And it will feel good for a day. Yeah, maybe a week, possibly a month. And then, like the Brits, who wanted to send a message, so they voted to leave Europe, only to find out If you vote to leave Europe, you actually have to leave Europe. And now they regret it. All the Ohioans, Pennsylvanians, Michiganders, and Wisconsinites of Middle England, right? They all voted to leave, and now they regret it. And over 4 million of them have signed a petition to have a do-over. They want another election. It ain't going to happen because you used the ballot as an anger management tool. And now you're effed. And the rest of Europe, they're like, bye, Felicia. You see, Michael Moore was right in his early assessment. These people were angry. Their factories were being given away. And Donald Trump stood up and said, I will tax you and no one will buy your cars. For all of this, all of the faults, Donald Trump, for all of the faults that you can point to, for all of the criticism you can give to him, Michael Moore was wrong. He said they would regret it. Yet for the past several years, we here in America have enjoyed a smashing record economy. Unemployment has been incredible. It's down, down, down. Jobs are up, up, up. People are making more money now. I hear it personally from people all throughout my area. They made more money last year than they ever did in any year before that. And now the economy is taking a major hit because of the coronavirus. I'm not going to blame Trump for the virus and the economic panic. That's not necessarily his fault. They argued that Trump wasn't doing enough. And I admit, I agree. Early on, he was saying it was like the flu. That was a mistake. And so did many conservatives were actually calling this out as well. Then Donald Trump announced there were going to be travel restrictions on Europe. And then they blamed him for sparking the panic. You know what, man? Here's what I said earlier. I don't know what the right thing to do is. I don't know if it could have been done better or worse. All I know is he was the one talking about the threat of China from the beginning. Now I want to show you something truly remarkable. Michael Moore said these people would regret it. They said it would feel good for a day, maybe a month. A month. For years, people enjoyed this booming economy. And now because of the coronavirus and panic, there's a real threat to it. Trump isn't forcing us to stay in our homes. People are doing it because we have to. That's not his fault. But what about Brexit? Michael Moore said they would regret Brexit. They did not regret Brexit. And 3 years later, on December 13th, 2019, they sent another message. The worst defeat in the history of the worst defeat the Labour Party faced in 100 years. This from the BBC. General election 2019. Worst night for Labour since 1935. The Labour Party is essentially their left-wing party. There were some places that hadn't voted conservative in nearly 100 years that flipped. They did not regret it. They demanded it in another referendum on Brexit, saying, we want this. They never regretted it. Michael Moore was wrong. And the people who supported Trump also, for the most part, didn't regret it. Now, I'll admit, I'm not going to pretend like everything's absolute and everyone loves the president. A lot of people probably grew to regret their decision to vote for him. But according to the New York Times, Trump's base is bigger than ever. Following impeachment, congressional Republicans have a higher approval rating than Democrats for the first time in 15 years, reversing a major trend. People are happy with their decision. And although we're facing the coronavirus, it is not necessarily Trump's fault. The economy is taking a hit. I think people will know that. Of course, in the media, they want to pretend like this is extremely bad news for Trump. It's his fault. They're saying he created the problem. And now we see something absolutely insane. The weaponization of the coronavirus against the president. This is from MRC TV. 35 times the media said Wuhan or Chinese coronavirus, but they blame the GOP. Since the beginning of this crisis, the media has said the Wuhan virus, China's coronavirus, China's virus. Yet for some reason now that Trump is saying it, they're claiming it's racist to do so. They're saying it's bigoted to tie the virus to China, and it is shockingly insane. The virus started there. I don't get it. But I think we can see the people in media have no idea what's going on. They really don't. They're just saying whatever their tribe needs to say. But I'm willing to bet Trump's approval rating has gone down in the wake of the coronavirus. Absolutely. But I'm also willing to bet there are many people, especially his base, that accept a pandemic is outside of your control for the most part. We can mitigate it. We can do a good job of it. And Trump may not be doing the best job. But think about our medicine shortage. That's not Trump's fault. Trump's been actively trying to reverse that problem. Like I showed you in September when he ordered firms to get out. And what do we see? It's one of the craziest stories I find truly hilarious. Check this out. He pulled the wool over our eyes. Workers blame Trump for moving jobs overseas. How does that make sense? They found a few people that don't understand what Trump's been doing. Check this out. Promises to save U.S. manufacturing and prevent American jobs moving abroad were a key part of Donald Trump's 2016 campaign. But since Trump took office in January 2017, nearly 200,000 jobs have been moved overseas based on trade adjustment assistant certified petitions. Is it Trump's fault that some jobs are still going overseas? Or is he actively trying to bring them back and just not doing a perfect job of it? Look, I'm going to look at it like this. If even Michael Moore is willing to admit that Trump was saying these things to these executives, stands to reason it would have been a lot worse were it not for Trump trying to actually prevent this. But I'll show you this now, man. I'm sorry, this is the wrong story. Ford cancels plan for Mexico plant as Donald Trump threatens to tax GM 3 years ago. Ford pledges $900 million and 1,500 new jobs to Avon Lake Assembly Plant. Yeah, I think Trump's demands these companies come back has actually, it's happened. It's worked. I mean, these companies are reopening plants. They're closing down foreign plants. Now, the other story I was going to show you, automakers resume or prepare to restart car production in China amid coronavirus outbreak. It's not perfect. Donald Trump is not perfect. I actually think he's a lot less than perfect. But I can give him credit where it matters, particularly on the threat we're faced now with wet medicine shortages and manufacturing shortages. Trump has been calling that out for the get-go. He was absolutely correct. Now, where are we today? You know, we're faced with a very real threat that we're not going to have the supplies we need. We're not going to have the medicines we need. Perhaps now we'll start bringing these things back. And that's what we're seeing in the New York Times. Coronavirus spurs U.S. efforts to end China's chokehold on drugs. The Trump administration says the U.S. is too dependent on China for vital drugs, but it's unclear how much Washington can do to alter global supply chains. We can incentivize the production of medicines in our country. We can offer up tax incentives and grants to those who would start producing again in our country. We should never be faced with this threat. It's a utopianist idea that we can say, China, you handle all the production and we just think you'll do right by us. But we've been facing military threats from China. Right now, numerous stories have been popping up about academics being arrested and charged for not disclosing their funding from China. China is buying out researchers and taking not just our ability to produce the medicine, but to even discover it. Academics are taking money from China because the short-term gains are just too good to give up. Now, here's my problem with the laissez-faire capitalism. They'll just do as you will, free hand, invisible hand of the market. Sorry, not free hand, invisible hand. When given the opportunity, these firms will give away our self-reliance. When given the opportunity, these academics will sell out to China because the money for them is good. We must have a sense of community. Otherwise, we will be left high and dry. China is saying, yeah, if we want to, we can cut off your medicine. And there ain't nothing you can do to stop it. Because they got a military too. They got a massive standing army. They got warships. We might have technological superiority. We might make great weapons here, but not medicine. And if you don't have humans, you can't man any of that technology. I guess technically we have drones, right? So for the time being, I think people need to get off the orange man bad narrative. Now is not the time to screech about Trump and whether or not he's doing well enough. Give him credit for calling this out early. And if we had reacted more harshly back then, we wouldn't be so worried today, would we? You can be angry that the man didn't do it fast enough. Fine. You can be angry that he was comparing it to the flu, and I certainly think he's deserving of criticism for that. But if we had reacted years ago off of what he was saying much more quickly, we wouldn't care. We'd have secure borders. We'd have more controls on who's coming in and when they are. And even though Trump didn't react fast enough, we'd have all the medicine we'd need, all the medical supplies we'd need, or at least enough or more. But we don't. And that's our fault. So I don't know what to tell you, man. I'll leave it with this. I'm sick and tired of people saying Trump's response, orange man bad. The reaction should be Trump's response, how can we do better? And we can look at what he's been saying for one. And we can focus on helping save lives and getting supplies to people instead of just using it as an opportunity to smear the president and screech Orange Man bad. They want to win an election. I get it. Now is not the time. Already a Democratic primary, Louisiana, has been postponed. That's a good idea. Now is not the time. I'll leave it there. I'm not even going to drag any of the Democrats individually. Many of them, I think, have done a good job compromising and negotiating on the coronavirus bill, providing us with information. I am not going to play these partisan games. I will leave it there. Stick around. Next segment's coming up at 6 p.m. at youtube.com/TimCastNews, and I will see you all then.